if you can pull up the pictures in case you're unfamiliar with the aspen tree. A couple remarkable things that I want to share. The first, of course, beyond the spectacular white on black bark and the leaves, which have this sort of magical way of shaking and shimmering in the sunlight, every individual aspen tree is actually part of one interconnected root system. So they're actually, as far as I understand, the largest single living organism. So they appear to us, of course, as single trees, each one standing alone, beautiful. But under the ground, under the surface, they are all connected by a single root system. And also, because the gorgeous bark is photosynthetic, it's still possible for the tree to grow even when the leaves have fallen away. So in other words, even through the winter months when the aspen trees no longer hold all of their leaves, the tree is still growing because the bark can actually hold that capacity for growing in adverse conditions. So I thought this was an amazing metaphor for our practice today, because we are all inextricably connected and we keep growing, even in the winter and even in some of the harshest conditions of our lives. As Deuteronomy Dvarim reminds us, Ki ha'adam etz hasadeh, we are, human beings are like trees of the field. So for today's practice, I really want to imagine us as a grove of aspens in the winter. Adi, you can take away the screen share. Thank you. So Rashi teaches that Tu B'Shvat is actually the time when the sap begins to rise to feed the leaves and the fruit of the trees for the year to come. And where I live, normally the winter conditions are relatively mild, but as Mark mentioned, we got our first snow in 2 years. Might not see any more, but it's beautiful and it's white outside. And so spring feels far away, and it's hard to imagine the air feeling soft and forgiving and fragrant. But Tu B'Shvat invites us to recognize that even when it feels like spring is far away, and we can extend that metaphor in all kinds of ways, including how we are finding our way through the pandemic, even when that sense of ease is imperceivable to our eyes, our growth is still arising, even when we cannot see it, even when we can't even imagine what those fruits will be and if they will be within our reach. And all of this reminded me of the yoga asana, the shape in yoga practice of Shavasana, otherwise known as resting or corpse pose, which typically concludes any yoga practice. Early in my practice, more than 20 years ago, I remember thinking that final resting pose was like the biggest waste of time. I mean, seriously, like, what are we doing after all, just lying there on our mats? And I, would just feel like, let's move on to the next thing. But my teachers were consistent and insistent in emphasizing that, in fact, the entire yoga practice is in service of that final resting pose. And it dawned on me one day that there is, in fact, a lot happening in that resting pose. And it was precisely my ability to slow down enough and to rest in stillness enough that I could notice just how much was happening on the inside, not so much in my doing, but in my being. So first, of course, I was integrating the practice that I had just participated in before moving on. I was resting from a space of efforting so that the sap sort of could rise again in my body. And perhaps most profoundly, I began to see my final resting pose as a kind of rehearsal of my own death. I was coming into contact with the truth of my mortality, even for a couple of minutes, and using it as a moment to remember that one day I will lie down for the last time, and that I hope and pray that that time I will be well practiced and I will be open-hearted and ready to accept and to release with a pure heart. So why do I talk about death on a day that is really about celebrating life, the birthday of the trees? As we all know, life and death are inextricably connected. And winter is going to give way to spring, and the sap is going to rise and bring forth new life, God willing. And our meditation practice gives us an opportunity to stop talking and moving and acting out there, and instead turn inside and rest our bodies and allow our silence to bear fruit. So just as we would lie in final resting pose at the end of a yoga class, we're going to practice resting in stillness and in silence in our own bodies today in our practice. So I hope that you will perhaps hold that same spirit of both sap rising in the midst of a kind of resting pose. So let's turn to practice. I want to invite us first to take our seat. This is where the practice begins. So we take our seat, and our practice deepens in how we take our seat. So make any adjustments, grab any support that is going to be steadying and comforting. You may invite in some gentle movement you need to settle. I invite you to welcome yourself to your seat or your mat or your cushion with love. You may want to take a cleansing breath or two just to help you in the process of release. If you're in a chair, feel your feet firmly rooted to the ground. And if you're on a cushion or lying down on the floor, feel your body anchored to the earth beneath you, rising up to meet you. Not only feeling the earth rise up, but really feeling the earth move through you. I invite you to take a moment to remember our intricate shared root system, like the aspen. We are all connected, all of us who are gathered here now and those who will join us later in practice. Beneath the earth's surface, we are one single organism. I invite you to feel into your trunk, your core. Notice where you can find strength, kavod, dignity, and even majesty, both in how you hold your trunk and how your trunk holds you. Imagine sap rising as the breath moves in and out of your body. Allow your arms or branches to rest securely in a way that feels natural in your body. Notice the way that all of your extremities are nourished and fueled by your breath. Notice the soft delight that comes with allowing your mouth to rest. Like a tree, you don't need to say anything. You don't have to have anything wise to say or any instructions to offer. Allow your mouth to rest as if you have no words to say. And now let's bring some attention to the breath. Each breath cycle is a sacred dance between each one of us. Each of us exchanging air over the distance. And with the help of trees, my exhale becomes your inhale, my inhale, your exhale. There's nothing unproductive about this sort of sitting. Our resting in stillness is in service of nurturing those seeds, those leaves that will one day produce flowers and fruit. There's nothing to do here. We give ourselves and each other permission to just be. So we'll sit for the next 6-7 minutes, resting in silence and in stillness, witnessing that silence and stillness. And I'll bring our sit to a close with the sound of my voice. My beloved yoga teacher, Carrington, always invites me to emerge from Shavasana, final resting pose, gently witnessing the new person that I have become, born of my practice. So I invite us all to witness who we've become, born of our practice. We can experience the link, I think, between death and life in our practice and in our bodies with each breath. It is here that we can rest and slow down enough to honor the in-between. This practice of sitting allows us to ritualize the transition between seen and unseen, frozen and flowing, sleeping and awakening. I invite you to bring some awareness into your hands, letting them rest where they are, perhaps hands to heart or belly or both. Maybe bringing palms together at your heart center. And into our hands, we place gratitude for this practice, for the gift of coming together to witness our being, to feel our aliveness, to rest, to breathe, to heal, to soften, to plant seeds. To remember that our time on this earth is limited and precious, and that beneath the surface, we are one. When you're ready, you can open your eyes. Feel free to bring some subtle movement back into the body. And I want to share a poem. Feel free to just listen. Adi, you could bring the poem back up on the screen share if it's helpful for you to read along. It's called Learning from Trees by Grace Butcher. If we could, like the trees, practice dying or celebrating birthdays, it would become as easy a part of us as our hair or clothing. Someone would show us how to lie down and fade away as if in deepest meditation. And we would learn about the fine, dark emptiness, both knowing it and not knowing it. And coming back would be irrelevant. Doing it every year just as something we do, like going on vacation. Whatever it is the trees know when they stand undone, surprisingly intricate, we need to know also, so we can allow that last thing to happen to us, as if it were only any ordinary thing. Leaves and lives falling away, the spirit complex, waiting in the fine darkness to learn which way it will go. So at this time, I turn it back to Mark. Thank you all for your presence and your participation.
Thank you, Jenny. It was exquisite practice, teaching. Looking forward to exploring it a little bit more with you and exploring bringing that into our life today and going forward. Friends, as Rabbi Jenny just taught so beautifully about the fundamental interconnectedness of life, we bring into our awareness now those we've lost and remember and honor our connections with them through Kaddish. So we invite you, if you have a recent loss or observing a yard site, to put the name or names of those whose memory you're honoring today in the chat box if you'd like. Optional, don't have to, and invite you to rise in body or in spirit for Kaddish. Yitkadal, Yitkadash, Shemei
Yitkadash
Rabbah,
Shemei Rabbah,
Yamad,
Yamadi
Yibrach
Rachute,
Shirutei,
V'Yamrit
Malchutei,
Malchute,
V'chayechon,
Yitkon
V'yamechon,
Uv'Makon
V'chayeh
Uv'Chayet
Beit
Kol Beit
Yisrael,
Israel,
V'agala Bizman
V'Agala
Karib,
Bisman Karib,
V'imru,
V'Imru
Amen.
Amen.
Yehei
Yehi
Shmei
Shmei
Rabba
Rabba
Mevarach,
Mevarach,
Olam
Olam
Melame
Melame
Amaya,
Amaya.
Yitbarach, V'yishtabach,
Yishtabach,
V'yitpa'ar,
Yitpa'ar,
V'yitaman,
V'yitaman,
V'yitaseh,
V'yitaseh.
V'yitadar,
Yitadar,
V'yitale,
V'yitale,
V'yitalal,
V'yitalal,
Shmei
Shemei,
Tekuf,
Tekusha,
V'Tekuftu,
Teku.
La'ela min kol
Elamim Kol
birchata
Birchata,
b'shirata
V'Shirata,
tushbechata
Tuchata,
v'nechemata
V'Nechemeta,
ta'amiran bi'alma
Gama,
v'imru
V'Imru,
amen.
Amen.
Yehi
Yehi
shlom
Shlam
arabamim
Arabamim
shamaya
Shemaya,
v'chaim aleinu
V'chim
v'al
Aleinu
kol
Ve'al Kol
Yisrael
Yisrael,
v'imru
V'Imru,
amen.
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 Oseh
Oseh
shalom
Shalom
b'mrama
B'Mama,
u'yaseh
V'Yaseh
shalom
Shalom.
aleinu v'al
Aleinu
kol
Ve'al Kol
Yisrael
Yisrael.
v'al kol
Yaakov,
yoshvei
Yoshvei
tevel
Tevel,
v'imru.
Himru,
Amen.
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 Well, thank you all, as always, for being here. Wonderful to immerse in Tu B'Shvat with all of you today. We invite you back tomorrow as we sit into Shabbat, as is our custom on Friday, with Cantor Kareth Spencer Shapiro tomorrow leading us at 12:30 Eastern. Thanks to Adi Stein, who has had a very smooth week of transitioning to holding our Mishkan, our tech container, so beautifully today. Thanks to Barbara Schumann for guiding Adi in that. Thanks mostly to all of you for showing up and creating this beautiful container and community of practice. Please to let others know who might benefit from it. Those who are joining us on Facebook, great to have you with us. Those who are watching the recording, please join us live sometime. Love to have you with us. And those who'd like to stay on or are able to stay on, please do. And looking forward to some conversation with Rabbi Jenny Solomon about today's beautiful teaching and about Tu B'Shvat and its place in the sacred cycle of Jewish practice. And if you do have a question for Rabbi Jenny, please put it in the chat box and preface it with question if you can, so that we can keep an eye on it. Well, that was definitely a home run, Jenny. That was beautiful. It was just beautiful. And so many, like so much there. What I, when I say that, I always think, what really hits home for me is when the teaching is simple and profound. And this was today in a number of different ways, with like basic ideas that are sort of like, really there's nothing really new here, but when it lands in a powerful way, like it did today, I think it's really special. So a couple of things you pointed out. Number one, about the fundamental interconnectedness, duh, as my daughter might say, it's a fundamental Jewish, not just a belief, but, experience, despite the brokenness of everything, that under the surface, there's a inextricable connection. The other, which is the one I really would like to explore with you today, is about the relationship with death. When you describe Shavasana as corpse pose, I kind of my heart stopped for a second, and because I always think, because I love that's my favorite part of yoga.
Now it's my favorite part too, but yes.
It was my favorite from day one.
Totally
All
fair.
right. Okay. So, but I never, and even though I know that it has that, it has that connotation, I prefer to think of it as rest pose, just relaxation pose. But I want to explore and hear you unpack a little bit this idea, and the poem at the end also, that incredible poem, makes that connection between dormancy/death and rebirth. And that's what Tu B'Shvat is exactly about, right? That the trees, the trees know this. They lose their leaves. We look at them in the winter and they say well, they're not doing anything. It's like they're dead, and they're not. They're not, but something's going on, and it looks like nothing is going on. Looks like it's over. Right. So I wanted to hear you talk a little bit about that. What do you if we study a tree and the cycle of the year in the tree, and we watch all the, all the, it's a bare tree in the winter, wind chill of 0, looking at it. What's our, can you just maybe put that teaching
For
in your
sure.
words?
For
Yeah.
sure. Look, I think it's just another practice of emunah, of faithfulness, in the same way that we come and sit day after day or week after week and sometimes wonder, is anything happening at all? What's growing here? What's different here? Um, Especially as we move through particularly harsh conditions in our lives. And I was actually thinking at the very beginning as I was teaching, like, yes, and in a similar way, Rosh Chodesh,
Mm-hmm.
right? We celebrate the new moon, not now when the moon is full and in all of its radiance, but knowing that it's there even when we can't see it. And um, so that's on one level, I think there's an emunah component.
Mm-hmm.
But additionally, that the fact that we are here for but a brief time is something that I certainly don't want or need to kind of dwell on in a sort of persistent sort of
Mm-hmm.
stance of awareness. But I find it helpful to just brush gently, right? And Shavasana it's not about sort of a harsh encounter with anything at all. Quite the opposite. It's about gingerly, gently um, touching the fact that we're mortal.
Mm-hmm.
And so I find that really actually supportive.
It's interesting. Like, it also makes me think of that maybe Shabbat has an element of that too, right? Of the letting go and surrendering, um, engagement as like, as a partner in creation. I mean, Yom Kippur, which is Shabbat Shabbaton, Shabbat of Shabbats, has that connotation.
Yeah,
But I never really thought about the weekly Shabbat as having that. I don't know. What do you think
yeah,
about that?
yeah.
Does that make it a downer? Shabbat Shalom?
No, I think it's an opportunity to practice our grasping and release.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know when I began to observe Shabbat in a more traditional way, um, it was just exceedingly difficult for me to let go of
Mm-hmm.
whatever I was working on, and wanting to sort of cross everything off my list. And it didn't always happen. It doesn't always happen. And now really looking at that as another spiritual practice of,
Mm-hmm.
the end of my life also. I may not have everything checked off my list. I know it won't, because I want to be there to experience everything. But that's not how the world, in all of its infinite wisdom, is designed.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting what I like made it, it was like jokingly saying that makes it a downer, but that right there, you know, bespeaks the judgment that we have, like death. No, that's bad. Right. And what's beautiful, I want to share the poem. I'm just going to share the screen for a second, the poem. And by the way, I see Kareth, who's leading us tomorrow, put it into the box, reference to this Natan Zach poem, which uses that verse that you mentioned. I'm going to put the Spotify. This is a must listen for today for Tu B'Shvat.
Great.
It's everyone attributes it to Shalom Chanoch, but it's a poem written by the Israeli poet Natan Zach, set to music by Shalom Chanoch, I think. Anyway, this poem, um, it's just like something we do, like comparing practice dying is like going on vacation,
Mm.
become part of our routine, right? And then we would learn about the fine, dark emptiness and both knowing it and not knowing it.
Mhm.
Coming back would be irrelevant.
Mhm.
That's like a letting go also. If I'm not like, okay, I'm going to do this so that, when I will come back, but it has no agenda. There's no agenda to it, right? It's just, and that is the essence of,
Cool.
I guess, this practice. It's just really, what a
Yeah.
poem. Wow. Where'd you find that?
She's a runner. So
She's a what?
She's a runner like myself. I found her
Wow.
through a running connection.
That
I
is really
know,
outstanding. Outstanding.
but I really do relate it to meditation, Mark. I mean, I think about when I first began to sit, and even now sometimes, and it's like I'm gripped by a little bit of fear.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how long is this going to last? You know, what am I going to notice? Can I do this? Is anything happening? I mean, all kinds of things uh, come into awareness,
Mm-hmm.
but I keep practicing, and it becomes less scary.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a question here that I didn't know this about redwoods, actually. I've always been in awe of redwoods and their incredible self-healing ability. I
Hmm.
didn't know that. You know anything about that? Would you please speak to how we can incorporate that into our practice, the self-healing nature of redwood trees? You familiar with that at all?
I don't know so much about redwoods, but again, living in Raleigh, I've had a number of trees that have revealed um, different kinds of wounds, and
Mm-hmm.
arborists coming by, and I'm always like worried, is the tree going to fall on the house? What should I do with the tree? And time again, the arborist says to me, most trees have a way of healing themselves. They kind of, they'll
Right.
show me how they create a band-aid
Uh-huh.
around the wound, and you can see like the branches are still bearing leaves, even if you see something going on down at the bottom of the trunk.
Mm-hmm.
And it is such a great metaphor, because again, we're not talking about a cure. We're
Right.
talking about our body's natural ability to bring loving, healing, good care
Yeah.
to parts of us that are weak or vulnerable or fighting, needing to defend. Um, and that,
Yeah.
the work of a lifetime.
That's for sure. And all the scars that build up. Actually, when you sang that, it's reminding me, like on my street here in Manhattan, there was this awful, weird, totally random act of vandalism of a tree. Um, Someone who kind of cut a band around the bark all the way around the tree, and then it sparked this real outrage. It was just like very hard to explain why someone would do that, but the whole neighborhood rallied around this tree and took measures, and the tree still is there, but you can see this basically a huge scar that is always there, and yet it survived, and still still bearing leaves. And um, so the other thing I want to ask you about in terms of this cycle, because even though we want to encourage ourselves to stay in today and not go too far back or forward, it is, I think, helpful to connect the dots Jewishly about like where how one thing leads to the next. And so the previous holiday, of course, was Hanukkah. Remember that?
Mhm.
Um, and for me, the turning point that leads us to Tu B'Shvat is actually Rosh Chodesh Tevet, which happens towards the end of Hanukkah. Going back to what you're talking about, Rosh Chodesh being like during Hanukkah, people may or may not know, uh, the moon is waning, right, and getting dark as we are increasing the light of the Chanukiah. I always like to think about it in some way we're engaging in this process of like coaxing that moon back in some way, and then it lights up towards the end of Hanukkah, and then starts waxing, um, and leads us into it. I don't know, like what's your sense about what's happening before Tu B'Shvat?
Mhm.
Where are we? It's a long this we've had a month and a half of no holidays, right? This dormant period.
Yeah. I think it's for me, again, a person who loves to, can be sort of unconsciously obsessed with my productivity and my worthiness being connected to what I'm able to do out in the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's an incredible thing to be reminded that this period of relative dormancy is actually quite alive.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot happening. And again, we don't need to be afraid of the
Mm.
fact that there isn't stuff, there isn't
Right.
drama, there isn't um, grand ritual. We're just in the practice of being,
Yes.
trusting that um, those flowers and fruits, they will reemerge.
Thanks. That's great. This was fabulous. Um, a lot of wonderful comments too. And a lot of nice compliments for you, Jenny, too. So I hope you save this save this chat. And if you ever have a bad day, just go. You know what I mean.
I do.
We all keep those files
We all need to feel
for the
good.
bad days,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So I just want to thank you. I want to remind everybody about the Big Bold Jewish Climate Fest, which is happening today, and it actually includes tonight. In case you haven't had a chance for a Tu B'Shvat Seder, there's like a Havdalah Tu B'Shvat Seder tonight that Lab Shul in New York is offering. I forget what it's called, Fruit Fest or something. Sounds good. Um, so check it out. Thank you, Adi. Thank you, Barbara. Most of all, to you, Jenny. Thank you again. Just wonderful. And everyone, go out and be with your trees today, people.
Amen.
Okay. Okay. Be well. See you tomorrow.